Welcome to Handmade History.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sonia.
And today we are talking about book artist, calligrapher, and embroiderer Esther Inglis. And this episode is brought to you by Melissa Galbraith of M Creative J. Raise your embroidery game and your stitch work with 3D botanical embroidery and stump work. The latest book from fiber artist Melissa Galbraith takes you on a tour of 17 botanical stump work projects, aka 3D embroidery, for embroiderers of any skill level. This book's user-friendly introduction for anyone who wants their embroidery to pop is packed with easy-to-use instructions will help you improve your stump work and master many skills. Thanks to the beautiful, high-quality photography within, you can easily follow along and feel inspired to create unique botanical embroidery and stump work of your own. Before long, 3D botanical embroidery and stump work will have you seeing your embroidery in a whole new dimension. Order your copy now at mcreativej.com. Thank you, Melissa.
Yes, thank you.
I stumbled upon Esther Inglis while I was researching another episode. She must have been mentioned in an article that I was reading, and I was super intrigued. I remember looking up her Wikipedia page because she lived during Shakespeare's time, the late 1500s and very early 1600s, and she was an artisan and a businesswoman. And I didn't learn about many artisans or businesswomen in Europe in the Enlightenment era. So I put her on our list of podcast ideas. And then after researching last week's episode, which is the broad topic of historical low and zero waste garments, I was looking for a narrower topic. And I assumed that Esther Inglis would just have a few articles written on her and that I could read all or almost all of them and then write this episode. But it turns out I was wrong. It turns out that Esther Inglis has been researched by many people, written about extensively, and has even had her own special exhibit at the Folger Library in England. So I had a great time learning about her, and this was all a delightful surprise.
Excited.
Yeah.
So who was Esther Inglis? Esther Inglis was a skilled calligrapher, embroiderer, and book artist who lived in England and Scotland during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I and James I. She created miniature handwritten copies of printed books and gifted them to nobles and royals to gain political and economic favors. She made approximately 60 hand-bound books, including several books with embroidered covers. There are two major collections of her books, the Folger Library in London and Houghton Library at Harvard University in Boston, and each collection contains 5 books.
Esther Inglis was the daughter of 2 French immigrants to England, Nicolas Langlois and Marie Prissot. Langlois is the French version of the surname Inglis, which is Scots, and both surnames mean English. Nicolas and Marie were French Huguenots, and these were Protestants who were persecuted in France at this time. And Nicolas's last name Langlois implies that though he was French, his family originally came from England.
It is unclear where and when Esther Inglis was born. She wrote that she was born in the year 1570 and also that she was born in the town of Dieppe, France. However, this contradicts London's town records, which show that the Langlois family emigrated to England and settled there in 1569, so we don't actually know. Inglis's family moved to Edinburgh, Scotland, when she was a child. Her father became master of the French school there, and he was patronized by King James VI of Scotland. Her mother, Marie Prissot, was a skilled calligrapher. She taught Inglis calligraphy. We assume Inglis was also educated by her father, although the education of girls at this time was by no means a given.
Inglis grew up in Edinburgh. She married Bartholomew Kellow, who was the clerk of passports there. And researchers A.H. Scott Elliott and Elspeth Yao write that, quote, Bartholomew was well educated, possibly at the University of St. Andrews. He wrote Latin verses in praise of his wife and her patrons, and translated from the French. He remains a shadowy figure and seems to have been employed on special services at home and abroad for King James. And Inglis and Kellow had 8 children. And Inglis used her own surname to sign almost all of her books.
So now we'll get into some background about all the royal drama that was happening at this time. Inglis lived during a tumultuous time in England and Scotland. Elizabeth I, who was Queen of England when Inglis was born, never married and had no direct heir. There was debate over who should succeed her when she died. James was the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and Mary was a cousin of Queen Elizabeth and the Queen of Scotland until 1567 when her cousin imprisoned her. James became the King of Scotland that same year when he was 1 year old. And he was known in Scotland as James VI, and this is who patronized Inglis's father's work at the French school. Mary famously embroidered the phrase, quote, "In my end is my beginning," and she was executed in 1587 for conspiring against the Queen. James was surrounded by Scottish nobles and leaders of various Scottish factions, many of whom tried to manipulate and control him. In 1582, he was kidnapped, and he eventually escaped. And he began to pursue two goals: to exert dominance over the various Scottish factions who vied for power, and to succeed Elizabeth to the throne. And he succeeded in both. He created an alliance with England in 1586. In 1589, he married Anne, a princess of Denmark, and in 1594, he had his first son, Prince Henry. He became King of England in 1603, when Esther was about 33 years old. In England, he was known as James I, and he began the reign of the Stuart family. He was a Presbyterian, which is a type of Protestant.
And this is relevant because Inglis was also a Protestant, and she supported James. Her husband, Bartholomew Kellow, as we mentioned, may have worked to further James's cause in England when he was forming alliances and working on succeeding Elizabeth to the throne. And Inglis might have helped in these endeavors through strategic gifts of her books.
But this was not the only reason that Inglis created and gifted her amazing miniature books. Inglis gifted various books to various nobles throughout her entire career as part of what researchers now call the patronage system. This system was not written down anywhere, and there were no explicit rules. It operated on context and mutual understanding between royals, nobles, and the professional class, which included Inglis. Essentially, people gave each other gifts to gain favor. And depending on the social class of the gift giver and the recipient, there were expectations on both sides.
And I tried to come up with a modern parallel to this, and I thought about the situation of gifting in the workplace. So around the holidays, for example, you might give a small gift to your boss to show that you like your boss and that you have a good relationship. And conversely, your boss might give you a small gift to show that you are a valued member of the team and to reinforce that you have a good relationship. Modern gift-giving rules are not explicit, but we all generally understand them, and we definitely know when they are broken. For example, one rule that people typically understand is that as the superior in a work environment, it's probably a good idea to get all of your employees the same type of present. A boss who gives a super extravagant gift to a single employee would be seen as favoring that employee or giving them special treatment. And when you break these rules, you break social expectations and upend social order, even today. For example, on the show The Office, manager Michael Scott causes mayhem at the annual office holiday party when he gives Ryan, the temp worker, an expensive iPod. Do you remember that episode, Sonia?
Yeah, it's so awkward. I can't watch it. And embarrassment is so
Incredibly awkward. It's because he broke the rules.
In Inglis's time, gift-giving was a big part of the social and political climate, and also the economy. Nobles gave gifts such as purses full of coins or fancy dresses to the queen. These gifts showed that they were wealthy and extravagant under her rule. But the noble class expected and even needed money given to them in return. Some nobles went bankrupt giving gifts to the queen. Members of the professional class would also give gifts to the queen to reinforce their working relationship and display their success. Members of the artisan class gave gifts to the queen in hopes that she would become their patron. For example, a poet would dedicate an epic poem to the queen, and she would reward him with an annual stipend. Inglis was in many ways a part of this last class, the artisan class, and she used her books to secure payment from the queen and others.
And handmade gifts like Inglis's books had a special power. Coins are impersonal, and dresses that others have made don't have the same kind of power that a handmade gift has. And women were uniquely positioned to take advantage of this. For example, Queen Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting gave her hand-embroidered handkerchiefs. And these gifts showed their loyalty to the queen like the other types of gifts, but they also reflected that even in their free time, her ladies-in-waiting were thinking of her. And researcher Lisa M. Klein, whose paper I read on this was really interesting, writes that, quote, women fashioned themselves as subjects, promoted their interests, and fostered social relationships by exchanging hand-wrought gifts. And so Inglis was uniquely positioned in the patronage system. She was well educated as a calligrapher and skilled as an embroiderer. She created miniature books, which were not only exquisitely handmade, but were also valuable and useful. She dedicated her books to nobles and royals in hopes of getting financial patronage or other types of favors.
Nothing was guaranteed under the patronage system. For example, Klein writes about a book of Psalms that Inglis gave to Elizabeth in 1599. This book had a hand-embroidered velvet binding with a Tudor rose and crown, and it was covered in tiny pearls. Inglis wrote a dedication to the Queen, which was self-effacing and humble. Klein writes that Inglis says that she hopes that, quote, her work will affect an intimacy with the Queen. This inscription shows one of Inglis's goals, which was developing a relationship with the Queen. Kello, her husband, traveled to London to give this book to the Queen. They were still living in Edinburgh at the time. Kello wrote letters to Sir Anthony Bacon, an important member of Elizabeth's court, revealing another of Inglis's goal, payment. Kello asked the Queen to appreciate that the book was hand-wrought by his wife, and he requested that she, quote, acknowledge it to him directly. But Queen Elizabeth did not do this. We know that Kello returned to Scotland empty-handed. We don't know why Elizabeth didn't pay Inglis for her work. Maybe she didn't think Inglis was important enough to grant favors, or maybe she didn't like the book. But eventually, Elizabeth gave the book to Christ Church in Oxford, which implies that she did think it was valuable, although perhaps only because it had belonged to her.
So let's switch gears here and talk more about Inglis's books themselves. So her books were tiny. Some were as small as 1 3/4 inches tall by 2 inches wide, or 3 inches tall by 2.5 inches wide. And they would include hundreds of pages of text. One that I saw included 189 leaves, which is 378 pages. All but 1 or 2 of these books were handwritten versions of printed texts, and most were religious. She copied books from the Bible in Latin, English, and French, including Ecclesiastes, the Song of Solomon, Proverbs, and the Lamentations of David. She also copied books of religious poetry. And as we mentioned above, Inglis was a Protestant, and she dedicated and gave her books to many prominent Protestants, including the Queen, Robert Devereux, the second Earl of Essex, Sir Anthony Bacon, Prince Maurice of Nassau, Prince Henry, the son of James VI/James I, who we talked about before, and others. In her books, Inglis used 40 styles of handwriting. Her handwriting was exquisite. Some of her letters are less than 1 millimeter high, which is only 0.04 inches. She illuminated her manuscripts with elaborate first letters and with illustrations. And her illustrations were typically copied from engraved pattern sheets which circulated at this time. These pattern sheets were made specifically for artisans to copy, including embroiderers, lace makers, painters, and goldsmiths. One popular collection of illustrations that Inglis used was called Flore de, which means Goddess of Flowers, which was created by Jean de Gourmont around 1600. And Inglis copied her illustration using a method called pouncing. I had never seen this before. So to do this method, you take a pin and make tiny holes around the illustration following the contours of the image. Then you flip it over onto a new piece of paper so that the printed side faces the paper. Then you use crushed up charcoal wrapped in a small piece of fabric to tap or smear the pinholes to transfer tiny dots to the new paper. And when you pick up the illustration, you'll see an outline of the image. And Inglis definitely used this method. Her illustrations are often reversed, which is what happens when you pounce because you flip the illustration over.
That's cool. She also created a number of self-portraits in her manuscripts. In doing this, she was the first British woman to use self-portraits in her books. A lot of the following comes from a truly excellent video analyzing various self-portraits on the Folger exhibit website. Inglis created self-portraits in a variety of styles, black and white and color, and both simple and ornamental. And here are some interesting features of them. In one, she is holding a quill and writing a motto that she wrote often, quote, from the eternal God goodness, from myself evil or nothing. In another, she has a lute to show that she is a proper woman, even though she is also a professional. You can see the evolution of her identity in these portraits through the hats that she wears. In early ones, she has a French-style triangle hat underneath a small British-style hat. In later ones, she has just the British hat, and its style changes over the years to reflect the fashions at the time. She also switches from a simple collar in her early portraits to an elaborate, stylish lace ruff in later ones. And for more on lace ruffs, you can listen to episode 9, A Brief History of Lace. Later portraits also do not include her writing implements. She becomes so well known as a calligrapher that she didn't need them. In one, she shows one of her own books on the desk, including ties which were used to close the book. And in another one, she signs it Esther Inglis, followed by, quote, her anagram, Resisting Hell, with one L.
Isn't that amazing?
That's a great anagram.
I know. Several of the books had embroidered covers which Inglis made herself. These were made from velvet, and they were covered in tiny seed pearls, which would have been prevalent where Inglis lived in Scotland. So the Folger Library worked with needlework historians Christy Gordon Beatty and Aaron Harvey Moody to recreate one of the embroidered covers in their collection. It was a copy of the Psalms of David in French, and you can see the entire original manuscript, including the cover, online. The original book was published in 1599, but thankfully the Folger Library has digitized it. The original manuscript is in very tough shape. It is only 3 inches tall by 2.5 inches wide. It was decorated with threads stitched in an intricate scrolling stem design with a larger motif in the center. The spine is decorated in the same pattern as the cover, and it continues the lines from the front and onto the back cover. And only 2 pearls remain on the original. And as a side note, this is not about the covers, but there were some amazing details in this book. The end papers were marbled using pink, gold, and blue paint, and they were really beautiful. And the edges of the pages were also painted with the same motif in blue and red. It was like modern sprayed edges of book covers. I did not know they did that in 1599.
Yeah, it is so cool looking, and I didn't realize it was so small when I was looking at it.
So tiny.
So tiny.
It's amazing.
So back to the embroidery. Beatty and Moody recreated the cover of this book to show what it might have originally looked like. While the fabric was a dull brown, which you can see online, they guessed that the original color was a dark red. Typical colors of velvet-covered books at this time included this dark red, along with dark blue and green and carnation, which is a pale red. The velvet that Inglis used was a very fine silk velvet, whose pile is lower than any that you can source today. Beatty and Moody ended up shaving down the finest velvet they could find, which they sourced from Italy. They also sourced gold thread from England, gold twisted cord from France, and silk thread from Japan and France. And they found pearls in India. These pearls, which were 1 millimeter in diameter, were the tiniest ones they could find, and they looked enormous next to the ones Inglis used. The microscopic ones that Inglis used came from Scottish mussels.
And at first, the researchers thought that they only needed 12 pearls to embellish the cover, but through their research, they realized that Inglis had actually filled the motifs with these pearls, and this is called understitching. So in fact, they needed hundreds of pearls to complete the design. Beatty and Moody wrote that, quote, copying the pattern and actually doing the needlework gave us deep insight into Inglis as an artist and maker. For example, they discovered that copying an illustration in thread rather than pen and ink or paint might have made Inglis tweak the original design to minimize the number of times that she would draw gold thread through the fabric, because every time you do this, you strip a little bit of the gold off of the thread.
So Inglis and Kellow moved to London in 1604, the year after James became king. She gave Prince Henry, the son of King James, a book in 1607 when Henry was 13. It was a collection of French religious poems that was delightfully decorated with flowers, fruits, ornamental borders, and coat of arms. It is now held in the library at Windsor Castle. She gave him other books in later years, including a book of Psalms in 1608, a book of arms for the new year in 1609, and a book of Psalms in French in 1612, as well as a book of Psalms in English. These gifts again had a dual role. She was attempting to earn his patronage, but also to influence him. In the dedication of the English Book of Psalms, she encourages Henry to be guided by religious texts, not just the secular classics. And other writers at this time did the same thing.
This second book of Psalms also had an embroidered cover, including 3-dimensional stumpwork leaves, knotwork flowers in a vase, and a scroll on the vase that is inscribed with red thread. It was also covered in beads and had yellow ribbon ties to close it. The prince paid Inglis £5 in 1609 and £22 in 1612, the same year that he died. £22 represented a large gift and might have been a, quote, terminal gift of patronage given after his death.
So we mentioned at the top of the episode that almost all of Inglis's books were copies of printed works. However, there are two exceptions. In one, David Hume, a philosopher and writer, had Inglis copy a version of his book, Vincula Unionis, to give to King James. This part of Vincula Unionis had never been printed, but Hume wanted to share it with the king.
The second exception is one of Inglis's early gifts to Queen Elizabeth called Sommaire Discours de la Foi, which translates loosely to Summary Discourses of Faith or Discussions of Faith. And no printed version of this book has ever been found. Scholars speculate that it was written by her father, Nicholas Langlois, or by Inglis herself. It is a book of church teachings from a Huguenot perspective. Her father includes a note to the Queen in the beginning of this book, and we are using a translation here made by researcher Jamie Reed Baxter. Her father writes, quote, "What has prompted my daughter to make this gift to you? Your religion, your sex, and your nobility." And this is a great summary of Inglis's goals in the patronage system. She wishes to grow her relationship with the Queen, further her religious and political cause, and to earn money. And Nicholas signed his note, quote, "Nicholas, by surname English, by nation French, the said Esther's father," which I just found really charming. I was thinking I could sign notes as Alicia, by surname of the kings, by nation American. Anyway. Inglis writes in her own introduction, quote, "Madam, I write here many things that you know far better than I do." She also writes, "I have prepared this little book, which I have written in various kinds of letters, and a portrait of the Christian religion, which I have drawn with my pen." And I find this very interesting. I love the idea that she wrote this book.
So Inglis and Kella moved back to Scotland in 1615. Inglis's books allowed her family to flourish. She even gifted a book to King James in order to secure an Oxbridge fellowship for one of her sons. Inglis made books until the year that she died in 1624. One of her last works was a copy of Emblems Christiens by Georgette de Montenay. She made this for Prince Charles, another son of James. De Montenay was a fellow Protestant, a Calvinist, whose life and work overlapped with Inglis's. De Montenay was born in 1540 and died in 1607. In contrast to Inglis, de Montenay was a writer, a poet, whose books were printed. De Montenay was born in Normandy and dedicated many of her books to the Queen of Navarre. There was a portrait of de Montenay in one of her books, holding a pen to show she is a writer, and with a lute next to her on the table, which we mentioned earlier, showed that she was a proper woman. This portrait likely inspired Inglis's self-portraits, and researcher Georgiana Ziegler calls Inglis's copy of de Montenay's work, quote, one of her largest and most ambitious manuscripts.
Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
So that is Esther Inglis. Brief tour. Sonia, what do you think?
I love this episode. It had so many of my favorite things. Tudor England.
Tudor England.
Embroidery. Books.
Dash of Shakespeare.
Dash of Shakespeare.
Yeah, I love that books that were printed already, people wanted to get a hand-copied version of the book, that they would take that as a gift and think that it was really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it's cool because I also in like last few years I've seen people kind of like getting into bookbinding again.
Yes. The other detail that I absolutely loved was the sprayed edges of that one manuscript, because I love sprayed edge books. When I see them at like Barnes and Noble, I'm always like, oh, it's so beautiful. And I thought that this was like a new innovation meant or made for like the book talk generation, but no, it's been here.
I do love that. It's a nice touch.
Oh, so beautiful. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Melissa Galbraith of M Creative J for sponsoring this episode. If you feel inspired to pick up an interesting embroidery project of your own, check out her book, 3D Botanical Embroidery and Stump Work, or visit her website at mcreativej.com.
If you have questions or comments, please email us at handmadehistoryhosts, HOSTS, @gmail.com, or visit our website at handmadehistorypodcast.com.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye. Yeah, I feel like that banter was solid.